Hello all, James here from James's Hometone, and I'm going to be doing a quick tips video here about preparing pots for ground connections, so that hopefully it'll help with making this process a little bit easier. Now I know it's an area that many people struggle with, understandably. Flowing solder onto the pot casing can sometimes be a little bit tricky, and hopefully these really simple tips just help make the process a little bit easier. So I'm going to show about preparing the pot, what kind of iron settings to use perhaps, and what wire types and how to attach those a little bit easier, as well as grounding your volume pot lug, for example. So yeah, we'll go through the various steps and hopefully it helps with your installs. So here I've got 3 pots which I've showed some examples on of what I'm going to be covering. So these have got ground, so if this was a volume pot, it's got the ground lug soldered to the pot casing in a couple of different methods. I'll show you how to do both. I've got some pre-tinned little solder blobs there which I'll be discussing, which help with making your wired connections. So I've got an individual wire connection here, or I've got the braided wire styles here. So these are a few different methods I'll be covering, and we'll be doing it onto these new pots here. So first of all, I think it's important to look at the right tools for the job. Now, you don't need a super posh soldering iron to make a good soldering connection. Of course it always helps, but at the end of the day the kind of hobbyist 40 watt kind of soldering irons will be more than up to the job for guitar wiring. They'll run to an optimal temperature for making your ground connections and whatnot. So something like a 40 watt iron will cover the temperature required. Iron tip style, all that kind of stuff is just down to personal preference really. I'm going to be showing it using a kind of needle point iron tip. It's just purely because that's what I've kind of used over the years, and it's through habit of what I'm most used to. Now temperature wise, I run my iron for effective ground connections at about 400 degrees. Now others might have other preferred temperatures, but I just find that ballpark helps really effective, fast, efficient kind of flowing of the solder for these ground connections, warms the casings effectively and whatnot. But the key really is a clean iron tip. So I mean, if your iron's kind of dull looking like that, that's not ideal. You're going to want to clean that, pre-tin it, make sure it's shiny. So I'll just give that a wipe over, which you can see already has helped. So you want access to like a damp sponge, or sometimes you might see the little like the wire wool kind of sponges, things like that, to wipe them down. I've always, again, it's just through habit, I've always used the damp sponge. So there we are, we've cleaned the iron tip a little bit. I'm going to pre-tin it there, just to help a little bit more, just to make sure we're going to be flowing all good. Now most solder wire you seem to be available to buy these days is lead free. It does run a little bit, you do need to run your iron a little bit hotter for that, because basically the melting temperature is higher with lead free than it would be for your old leaded solder or 6040 or something like that. So these temperatures, if you happen to be using leaded, you might find you can run it a little bit cooler. But I'll show it for lead-free solder, sorry, because that's pretty much what you can only buy these days. So yeah, I'll show you first what I mean by pre-tinning. So that's these little blobs here, and why I do these is it helps prepare the pot casing for when you make a wire connection. So how we achieve that, I'll just show for example's sake. Let's do one just here. So I've got my iron tip placed on the pot casing. This may be 3, 4, 5 seconds, something like that, with the temperatures we're running, and then just flow some solder on, and you'll see it take to the surface when it's warm enough. So you're just warming the pot casing, warming the surface, heating the joint, however it is you want to say it, and then when you flow solder on, it takes to that surface much better, which will really help when you come to attach your wires later. Yeah, so that's the basis of pre-tinning. So I might do those for wire connections, I'll do those for ground lug connections. They all really help. So with those basics of the pre-tinned area, let's look at attaching a braided style pickup wire, or wire from a switch if it's a Les Paul or 335, something like that. So this is great to work with really. It's this is Gavit wire, but I'm sure there's other brands of similar construction. So we've got an outer braid here, which is used as ground on this occasion. It's really easy to work with. You just push that back. If you hold it still, you can bunch it back. Push it out of the way to expose the cloth covered central core, so that'll be like the hot signal wire if it was a pickup, for example. On the Gavit stuff, this one is actually stranded. I won't worry too much about showing you all the kind of ins and outs of that at the moment. We can do that on another one. We'll just concentrate on the pot connections here. So for this, we're going to be imagining it's a pickup wire, so we'll be attaching that to the input lug, for example. So it'll be situated something like that, with the central core wire going to the input lug of the pot, and then the braid positioned somewhere over the pot casing. So I'm going to pre-tin an area on the pot casing just around that sort of area first before I attach anything else. Now when I'm grounding the braided wire, you might find that doing a small little area like I've done there, I might want to go a little bit more just because I want to solder either side of the braid. So I'll place my iron tip on the pot casing again, allow that connection to warm up a little bit, and then I'll flow some solder. And you'll see it start taking to the surface, and I'll just spread that out a little bit to give me a little bit more working area on this occasion. So first of all, just to help keep the wire still really, I'm going to solder that into the input lug. Again, I won't worry talking you through this because we can cover that in another time, but that just helps keep the wire still on one end. Now I'm going to show you one method where I solder either side of the braid. You can just do it one side if you want, but if you want a little bit more secure, then we'll do it either side. So I'll just weight it down. Just again, you might have a soldering helping hand with the little levers, arms and things like that to keep a wire still, but you don't necessarily need those. Just a trusty set of wires or something weighted to keep the wire still. And here, because on our pre-tinned area, then I'm going to place the iron tip on that pre-tinned area, and then also touching the braid a little bit just to warm that connection. This will all help the solder flow. So I'll just place it on and gradually flow some solder on. And I'm going to do that both sides on this occasion. Again, one is enough, but I'll show you both in case that's what you want to do. And there we go. So we've got a nice simple braided wire connection. It's nice and secure, and yeah, so that's how to solder that kind of style. And I'm also going to show you a slightly different method of grounding your braided wire, which you might find a bit more useful if you struggle doing it that way, or getting your iron in there to do that, which can be a bit fiddly, might take a bit of practice. So yeah, push some of your braid back, and then grab something like a really small flathead screwdriver, or you can use your needle nose pliers if you've got some, and just pop it in between that push back braid, and just try and separate some, just strip some of that braid in. Might be a little bit tricky to handle, but you only need a little bit really. And with that kind of shredded and separated, we can bring it all together and twist it to form a little wire. So you might find attaching that to the pot casing a bit easier because you've got a little wire to deal with instead of just the outer braid, the thicker outer braid. And the only thing I would say is you might want to pre-tin that little wire, because it might fray or something when you're handling it and make things tricky. So to pre-tin a wire, a stranded wire, similar method to the pot casing really. So you're just going to place the iron tip onto that braid, warm it up a little bit, and just flow some solder onto it. So that'll make it easier to handle, it'll be firmer, it'll be easier to flow solder and make a more secure connection when you do that. So I'm just going to essentially repeat the process as I just did with that prior connection really. I'll line it up so it'll be positioned about there. So I'm going to pre-tin an area on the pack casing around there ready for that. So it was around there, wasn't it? Just do it about there. There we go. And again, I'm going to push back that. So you might see braided wire like this on like traditional style humbuckers or P90s, but it's also commonly seen on Les Pauls where the wires come down from the switch. So there might be an occasion where you need to make 4 of these connections, so it's good to get used to it and get a good feel for that. So I'm just going to solder that there to get it nice and steady. I'm getting in the habit as well of just giving the iron tip a little wipe down in between each connection, both after and before. Just all helps the process. If you've got a kind of discoloured or dark or iron tip and it's not tinned or cleaned, you're gonna really struggle to effectively flow the heat really and get a good connection. which probably is usually the reason why people struggle with one of these ground connections, really, is transferring the heat effectively. So yeah, clean the iron tip. And then, so we've positioned our pre-tin little strand of wire there from the braid, and we're going to place that over there, over our pre-tinned area, and then just flow a bit of solder, and you should see that take to the surface pretty easily with the pre-tinned area. So that's two common methods of, I'm sure there's others if somebody wants to share, but yeah, that's the way I've kind of been doing it, and hopefully it helps with your pickup or switch wire installs. Now a kind of more standard wire might be something like this, and you might get pickups with individual wires, like a single coil for example might have just two white and black or yellow and black, something like that, two individual wires stranded. So again, you might have a plastic coating or you might have cloth coating like this. So this one's a cloth coated Gavit wire, and the central core is actually pre-tinned. So exactly the same method. We're going to be working with a pre-tinned area, so I'll prepare that area now. So I'm going to clean the iron tip, place it on the casing for a few seconds, allow that joint to warm, and then flow some solder. It can be a little area, it can be a bigger area like that. And just something to keep the wire nice and still. Place it over there. Place your iron tip over that wire and pre-tinned area. And flow some solder onto it. Keep it still for a moment and that should do the trick. Cut that off so the wire doesn't tangle me up. So yeah, those are some simple methods of grounding pickup wires or switch wires or ground wires from your bridge, for example. And yeah, I really hope it helps. I mean, I really do recommend, if you've got old pots, spare pots, the pots you've taken out of the guitar ready to replace, if you've got those to hand, practice on those first before you do so on your new pots. Get the confidence of effectively warming the joint, flowing that solder, what it feels like or what it looks like when it takes to the surface properly, because if you're seeing it pool up, then it's just not going to take. There's something preventing it from transferring that heat, and that's either the iron tip not being tinned or clean, or you've not effectively warmed the surface that the solder needs to take to. Those are the key reasons usually why it's not flowing. Yeah, so let's move on to grounding the pot lugs and how you might prepare the pot casing for that. So on your volume pots, for example, you might need to ground the outer lug, and there's a couple of ways you can do that as I've displayed on here. So you could do that with a little jumper wire, or you could bend the lug back, and there's a few ways you can bend the lug back really. So you might want to just grab some pliers and bend it back so it's touching the kind of corner like that. And if I was doing it that way, I'd just pre-tin a little area around there. In fact, I'll just show you that, how I might do that. So pre-tin a little area where it kind of contacts, and then when I bend it back to that area, I'll have an area ready to heat the joint and flow that solder to do that. I'm going to show you the little method I do. I always, just through habit, and find it looks quite neat as well and keeps that lug out of the way as well, is bending it back a couple of times. So I'm going to pre-tin the area first just so it's not in the way. So the wires got tangled. Right, so I'm going to be bending the lug back and to the side of the pot casing there, so I'm just going to pre-tin that side of the pot casing just behind where the lug is. So I've warmed the joint, flowed a little bit of solder on. You don't need too much behind there, obviously you don't want it to drop down or pull up onto the lug itself. So first of all, I'll get the needle nose pliers and I'll bend the whole section back of the lug first so it bends outwards, and then I'll get the pliers again and bend it towards there. That sits nice and flat against the surface, and then to solder that, I'll place the iron onto the area to warm the joint, and then just flow some onto that pre-tinned area in the lug there, and that's one way to do it. The other way is through a little jumper wire there, so let's have a look at doing that. So here I'm going to grab some just central core wire, or you can do this with like just some copper wire, for example, anything suitable. So I'll just push back some cloth wire like that. I'm going to bend the lug into a slightly closer position so it pushes through a bit neater. Now here, the wire's going to be sat on the top of the pot casing, so I'm going to pre-tin a little area behind there where it'll contact. Allow the joint to warm. Flow some solder to pre-tin. And I'm going to place that through there. There we go. So place that through. We can trim it off later. So I'll pop the iron on, warm the joint, and flow the solder onto that pre-tinned area. Which should be a darn sight easier than not pre-tinning anyway if you're struggling. So there we are. We can now trim that. You can do that before and after really. And then just solder it to your lug. So yeah, if you're doing some a fresh install, just installing pickups, installing a new harness, I mean things like that kind of stuff will be already done on your harness, I'd imagine. But if you still need to attach your pickups, you might need to attach switch wires if it's on a Les Paul where it's all in sections. Yeah, so here's a few different methods on common wire types. Of course there are various pickup wire types. You might get a 4-conductor with the thinner plastic covered wires, but the same rules apply if you're attaching your ground wires to the pot case, and it's the same method whatever wire type really. But these are the two traditional types of the individual wires or the braided covered wire. And then if you're doing a fresh install, hopefully the ground lug methods will help you out with a few different styles to try and practice with. So yeah, happy soldering, and I really hope these basic tips help in your progress, and yeah, happy soldering all. Here at James's Homertone, we're passionate about guitars, traditional and unique, and we proudly represent the brands that share our ethos of getting the most out of your own guitars. Our online shop is a curated collection of accessories, electronics and parts, pickups and of course guitars, with an easy to use checkout as well as convenient shipping methods which are available across the UK, Europe and selected countries worldwide. The shop is a culmination of a lifetime's obsession with the guitar, and we hope that your visit provides a sense of that through the quality products we offer, as well as the unique nature of the brands that we proudly represent. Check out the website at www.homeoftone.co.uk, and I hope you enjoy your visit. Thanks for watching this video here on our channel, and if you did, it'd be great if you could click the like and subscribe buttons too. We really appreciate your support. Thank you very much.